Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? So today we're going to be finishing up the Datamine cards. We still have a little bit left to go over, so let's get into it. There are still some Datamine cards that don't have like art or skills, right? They just have a name, and we aren't really talking about that because it's just not. It doesn't seem like it's close enough to release that it warrants it, right? Things can change for sure. But the first one we do have is Red Guardian. So this one has the ability of you must play a card here per next turn. It's a 3 energy 6 power card, which is not bad. It just kind of restricts your next play. It doesn't mean you have to play all your cards here. It just means that you have to play one card here. It's probably kind of like Morag, where the first card has to be played in that location. Then you're kind of free to do everything else. A 3/6 is definitely not bad. Being restricted to playing a card here could be weird in that it telegraphs your opponent what you're going to do next turn, or at least a hint of what you're going to do next turn. And if that's worth maybe like the extra 1 power, maybe extra 2 power in some scenarios, this could definitely be a reasonable card. So I do think this is something that could see play. It has less power than Maximus, but the downside isn't as bad. Honestly, I don't think being forced to play in a particular location is worse than giving your opponent 2 cards normally. So I think this could see play. It's not like super crazy or super special. It doesn't do any game swinging abilities. It's just like a nice tempo card if you don't care about playing in the same location next turn. So definitely seems solid. Obviously, cards like Silver Surfer are gonna like it as well. So I can definitely see this being used in the game. Next up, we have Silver Sable. So this one has you can only place a location when you have 6+ total power, meaning that this isn't played early game. Essentially, that's what it means, right? You can't really have 6 power in turn 1. So this is really just a mid to late game card, which could be fine, right? This I could definitely see this in something like Zoo or Swarm decks, where you want to just have these powerful cards at the very end to kind of finish out your game. So I could definitely see decks that run it, right? Like it's not going to be you're not gonna run this as your only 2 or like a curve 2, right? You can't play this on 2. But you can play this on 3. You can play this, after as long as you have that power. So I do think there's definitely going to be decks. There's definitely decks that just like having cards with tons of power and just playing them, right? It doesn't matter what they cost, what they do, as long as they have tons of power. And this definitely fills that niche. It's just not something you'll play on 2, which is maybe it's a weakness. But if you're running a deck that has lots of options on 2, this could just be a late game piece for you. So I do think this will see play. I think it's probably pretty good in the decks that it works out. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of decks where you can't really run this, but in the decks you can run it, I can definitely see it having a place. Next up, we have Stryfe. If your opponent has 12+ power here at the end of any turn, destroy this. So this one is weird, right? It's kind of like Maximus, except if your opponent contests the lane, it dies. So I'm not too sure about this. Obviously, you can run it with armor or 0, I guess. But the downside is really hard, is really harsh, essentially. 12+ power is not that hard to make. And it just dies, right? Like, so if your opponent has 12+ power here, you lose that lane, essentially. I'm not sold on this one. Maybe if you're playing armor and a Tuma, right? Like you're an armor or Tuma deck, but then you're just opening yourself up to getting Enchantress or so, and then you're just like, you're doomed, right? So I'm definitely lower on this one than all the other ones we've seen so far. I think the weakness is pretty hard. Obviously, if your opponent isn't playing, like you have to play this last turn essentially, and it has to be in a lane that no one has played into, or your opponent hasn't played at all, right? So there has to be an empty lane that your opponent hasn't played at all the last turn, and then you can play this. But that means you're playing double threes instead of maybe a 6-drop. And if you play this on 5, right, you're just opening up your window to just get destroyed. So I'm not a fan of this one overall. I think its weakness is pretty apparent and hard to really fit in a deck that can like take advantage of what it's doing. I would say obviously armor decks can use it, but there's still some weaknesses in playing armor decks for this. I'm not not a fan of this one so far. Okay, next one. There's a couple of cards in here that use other cards, which I think is pretty unusual. But this one is definitely the first of it. If you move the human target to this location, +5, +10 power, right? So obviously you're thinking about doing it multiple times, right? Where you'll move a human torch, you'll move it back to this guy. I think the issue with that is that it won't really, you're not gonna get 2 procs on this. There's one scenario that I'm wondering if will work. So let's say you play Surtur first, and then you'll move a human torch, and then you'll play Heimdall. Here, I don't know how you'd do that. You'd have to electro or wave Surtur. But then how would you move human torch twice, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's just think about it in the normal circumstance. You proc it once, right? So it's a 5/10. With in move deck, it's a 5/10 if you're running human torch. It's still too restrictive, right? Like 5-drops, you can get 10 power on 5-drops without like having to do all this work. I feel that's like my main issue with it. Yes, you could play it, but unless you're able to proc it twice consistently in a deck, I don't know if it. I wouldn't say it's worth it compared to other cards. I think you just play a different 5-drop that does very similar things. And you don't have to do all this effort. And you're also telegraphing your next play. You're like saying, "Oh, I'm going to be moving my human torch to this." Like, like you lose this lane, go win the other 2 lanes essentially. All right? Like it's a little too telegraphed for me, so I'm not a big fan of it. I think move decks are getting a lot of good things. And while this could be good, if you can proc this twice in a game, then I'm happy, right? But if realistically, when you draw this, you can only proc it once or 0 times, right? You got to think about the times you're procking it 0 times. You're only procking it 0 or 1 time. I just don't see it being worth it. So, not a fan of this card overall. I think it's too restrictive and not very flexible in how you want to approach the games. So not a fan. Don't like it. Thumbs down for me. 2 stars or out of 5 or whatever. Next up we have Phoenix Force. So this one is pretty interesting, right? It's a 6-drop, 6 power, 3 energy. Revive one of your destroyed cards with +5 power. Revive one of your destroyed cards with +5 power. If it's Jean Grey, +10 power. So let's say you revive a destroyed card, right? That makes it a 6/8. Plus you get to destroy. How effective can that be? What destroy effect can you really use, Lice, to take advantage of this? That is a question. And where's the destroyed card play? In the same lane and the laner was destroyed? I assume the laner was destroyed, right? This could be a Shang-Chi counter. I mean, if you're a I could see it, right? If you don't have priority, they destroy your card and then you revive it and they're like, "Oh, that's really good." If it's Jean Grey, we talked about Jean Grey earlier. I should have put Jean Grey in here, right? I definitely should have done that. I believe Jean Grey was a 3/3. Yeah, it was a 3/3. Your next card you're played must be played here. So you'd be reviving a 3/3 into a 13 power card. You'd have to destroy Jean Grey, which isn't that hard, right? You can definitely use Carnage or Venom or anything like that. So it does turn it into a decent play at 6/13. You'd have to be playing Jean Grey. But I do feel like you could make a deck out of this. This one doesn't feel that unreasonable to draft around. So I think this one I'm more okay with. This one's hard to know how good it actually will be, since it's so unique in terms of there is no card that revives destroyed cards, right? And that might just be like a really nice answer to Shang-Chi decks where if you're running like, I don't know, some big guy on 5 and then you play this on 6 and you could hit that, you could hit your Jean Grey, that kind of thing. You're also probably running Destroy, so it means that you might be able to do something like, well, if you're running Death, right? Death won't work, but because you don't want to destroy your 1-drops. I mean, even if you revive a 1-drop, I guess it's not the end of the world because it's gonna be 6 power or 7 power. So maybe that could work. You could run like a Phoenix Destroy Death deck with Jean Grey in it. Anyways, we're kind of spitballing. I'm not gonna dive too deep. I think it's an interesting card though. This is the one that makes my brain turn the most out of the ones we've seen so far. The other ones have been very like, here's stats and here's restrictions to the stats. This one is like kind of build around essentially. Next one we have is Uncle Ben. When this card is destroyed, add Spider-Man to your hand. I definitely feel like this is very thematic of a card. I don't know how meta it's going to be. Adding Spider-Man Spider-Man is a toxic card, and being able to get it on will could be good, but it's a 1/2, and you have to, you're playing like Killmonger, and then you get a Spider-Man, and then you Killmonger. I mean, you Spider-Man a lane. Not super amazing, honestly. I don't know. It feels like this one is definitely made for the theme of it more than the meta viability, in my opinion. Obviously, I could be wrong, but free Spider-Mans aren't necessarily always played. I guess you could play this with Galactus. Ah, man, damn. I don't want to say that, but you could. I mean, you are telegraphing your opponent. If that is the meta read, you are saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this to you." But yeah, I mean, it could definitely work if you want to have two chances of doing that. But overall, I'm not super sold on this one. Getting a Spider-Man's cool, but it's not like a archetype you need 2 copies of. Old Zabu would probably like this, but no one's really playing. No one has Old Zabu, right? So you can't really double Spider-Man that easily. You can double Spider-Man a single lane, and maybe that might be the strategy where on 4 you'll Spider-Man into Spider-Man. It is 8 power investment though to do that, right? 8 energy investment unless you're playing Zabu. So I guess you could go Zabu on 3, Killmonger, Iron Man on 1, Zabu on 2, Killmonger on 3, Spider-Man on 4, Spider-Man in a 1-drop on 5, and then something else on 6. Maybe that could be good enough to win. You have to fight the other lanes though, right? Like you'd have to be really careful. Maybe if you go maybe in locations that already have 1 lockdown very done, and then you go Dr. Doom on the final turn to kind of win all the lanes, win 2 of those lockdown lanes. I could see that, but overall it seems like a lot of effort, right, to do that. It definitely has some weaknesses, right? So I'm not super sold on it, but I do think there are some competitions that will run something like this, and you could do it with maybe discard to get more cards, right? Like getting a free card is not bad generally. So I can see there's a world where there's something to do with this, but generally I'm not like super sold. And then the last one we have, oh, I didn't put the name on this one. Oh, whoopsie. This one is called X23. So yeah, I'll just keep that in mind. X23. It's probably a Wolverine variant, right? Because she has Wolverine claws. But when this is discarded from your hand, put it back at cost 0. This reminds me of Sabretooth, I would say, just for discards. But Sabretooth isn't that played in Destroy effects, even though it has very similar files. And I feel like this is going to have the same feeling where you'd rather just destroy or discard better cards. You don't really need to repeat the destroy effects. Discarding is kind of hard to do. It's not very accessible. And even destroy has a better time repeat destroying that Sabretooth, where you're not going to have an easy of a time repeat destroying this one card to proc Morbius or something. You're not going to have as easy of a time. It's going to be a lot harder to force to discard on this or discard things you don't want to discard. So I actually think it's probably harder. The benefit of maybe if your opponent is forcing you to discard Moon Knight and stuff like that, if that's the meta, then maybe this could be like a nice tech. But generally that's not going to be the case, and it just feels like it's going to be hard to get this to work in your favor. Like you're gonna have it and it's gonna be like, oh, I got a 0 cost 3 power. But then you're like, it doesn't matter. It's not changing my game, right? So that's maybe my issue with this one. So I'm not super sold on it. You'd have to add more discard synergies. Something like, I don't even know what synergy you'd have, right? That would make this work. But you definitely need to be able to force a discard of specific type or specific number or something like that. And you really can't really do that right now. So I'm definitely not sold on this one. I would say that I'm most interested in the Phoenix Force. But I also think Red Guardian and Silver Sable will also be pretty useful, at least in the way I play. So definitely some interesting cards here. This one's X23. But overall, those are the last bunch of cards we have for now. Definitely once they start adding more new cards or they start adding the names and the effects of other cards, we'll try to cover them as well, right? There's cards like Echo and stuff like that, Gore, but they don't have abilities, don't have names. They don't only have their names, right? So it's not something to really discuss. So for now, we'll just ignore them. But overall, take care of yourselves. Hope you guys learn something, and which ones do you guys like? Which ones are interesting to you? I'll see you in the next one.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be